The following program is sponsored by Friends of Life Outreach International.
What does it take to bring a restoration of values to this nation on which we were founded?
Coming up, best-selling author Jim Garlow encourages us to preserve the pillars of our civilization: freedom, faith, and free enterprise.
From a historical standpoint, this is the only social issue that if we lose on this one, they can silence the gospel.
Freedom's hope in challenging times. Next on Life Today.
Well, we welcome you to Life Today. Betty and I are thrilled to have you. I'm James Robinson. We've got someone today that I am just really seeing as an answer to prayer. Betty, you've been concerned about the country for a long time. You feel like we are moving, away from our roots?
Our principles. Mm-hmm. Principles, foundations that I believe God gave us and what brought this country into being, you know. I'm not a historian, but I'm a mom, a mother, a housewife who cares about what's going on in our country and the decline I see it taking.
Well, we have a pastor with us that understands the potential of the church to impact what seems to be areas that would be impossible to deal with and certainly to win. Jim Garlow is at the Skyline Wesleyan Church in the greater San Diego area. He is the chairman of Renewing American Leadership, which is an organization to literally return us to, I believe, the foundation principles. I know Betty does. I think most of you believe that enabled us to be a great nation. It was an organization that's been founded by Newt Gingrich, who has a great concern from a historical perspective as well as a leadership role. And he sees in his own life, he's had incredible, refocusing of all priorities personal and a great concern for the nation. And he had, I think, the insight, Betty, to ask Jim Garlow, the pastor of this great church. Some of you know John Maxwell, who's a very well-known writer and teaches so effectively on leadership. He was the former pastor at Skyline Wesleyan Church, but Jim Garlow is a close friend. And Jim, I want you to know we're glad to have you here.
Good to be with you, my friend.
I'm glad you've got that role. I do want to mention up front that you wrote a book that would be great for everybody to get, dealing with God and civilization all the way through this nation. It's called How God Saved Civilization, and there's Jim Garlow website, and then The Covenant, and then a new book, Heaven and the Afterlife. I haven't gotten to read this one, but people tell me it is insight into the future that is profound. And you did tell me that we had a little effect on you writing at least these first two books.
You had a great impact. You're understating it. You had a great impact on those books coming into existence.
There is Jim Garlow's website. I really highly recommend you consider going on, getting the books. If you don't happen to find it in the local bookstore, we'll say, I'll get it from him. I want it because they're great. Jim, you led the Proposition 8 vote out in California, which was doomed as far as the pro-family and pro-marriage group was concerned. There was no way that Christian people who believed that marriage was important and that important enough to stand and to oppose the proposition that same-sex marriage would be approved in the state. Why did you think that was important enough? And by the way, were you quite surprised at the outcome in light of the way the deck was supposedly stacked against you and the percentages were out of sight that you would lose?
We were told we were 38% behind, 38 to 55%, and no proposition had ever started in a negative and ever won in the history of the state. And then the Republican governor was against us, and many of his cronies. The Democratic institution was against us. The media was against us, and Hollywood was against us. So we didn't have a lot of people for us in that. So it started tough, but we every day got up believing we could win. And we saw that exactly happen. By the way, I'm only one of many who helped lead that, only one of many. Nobody can take the credit. God gets all the credit for what happened. But the reason we were so passionate is from a biblical standpoint, God's understanding of the nature of marriage is the image of God on earth. It's in the creation of marriage, where two become one, that the full image of God is expressed. So if I was the enemy, I'd want to do away with marriage so that the full expression, the full spectrum of God's image on the earth could not be represented. And also, it's the glimpse of the closing of history when Jesus and the church come together. That's real marriage. We only have kind of an appetizer course here on earth with marriage. The real marriage is yet to happen. So if I were the enemy, I'd want to do away with the picture or the metaphor or the description of the great intimacy and joy and delight that's going to come in the consummation or the climax of the ultimate marriage, Jesus and the church. So that's from a biblical, a theological standpoint. But from a historical standpoint, this is the only social issue that if we lose on this one, they can silence the gospel. Because we've lost on a lot of social issues, but it doesn't silence the gospel. But this one is an exception because everywhere the state has a vested interest in defending same-sex marriage, it has an equal interest in silencing those who oppose it. And there are tremendous numbers of legal examples in this country and in Europe where they're about 10 years ahead of us in this tragic journey.
Well, you know, that is an issue that should be of supreme importance, marriage, to every believer, enough to take a stand. You did, you won. Every state where it's been brought up to vote has
31 states
in favor of marriage, as we understand it. You also know that abortion is a major issue. Why do you think the church is seemingly so quiet about something so significant?
It is without excuse that we could be silent why so many are being killed. I've shared with you that I take people on tours of Europe, just trying to understand what happened in Europe. What happened? We go to tours of John Wesley and Martin Luther and Ulrich Zwingli and some of the great church leaders. I always try to include a trip into Buchenwald, a concentration camp, because I say, we go in here and we ask ourselves, how could 6 million Jews be killed? Well, obviously the church was silent with a few exceptions. Well, there's going to come a day, if we see the kind of renewal in American culture that we long for, 100 years from now, where there will be tours of America, where they will go into the abortuaries, the killing centers, and say, imagine, 100 years ago, they were actually killing preborn babies. And the church was largely silent during that time. Now, as your question as to why, I think the core of the answer of that is we have been consumed with more desire for respectability from other people than we have a healthy fear of God. That is the core reason for all compromise.
You know, Betty, you've asked the question to me that I've had a lot of our viewers ask, and anywhere we travel, if I have interaction with people, and even we're getting the question over on emails, what can we as Christians do to turn the tide? You felt when we opened the program, the country's headed in the wrong direction. Does it trouble you, the ever-increasing size of the government, the increasing debt that's going to be passed on to your grandchildren and just literally dumped on them? Is that part of what disturbs you?
Absolutely. You know, I feel like I love my family. I love my children, our children, and our grandchildren. And I feel like we have a responsibility to be a part of their future in a positive way. And if we start this downhill deal of just stacking debt upon debt upon debt, where are they ever going to come out of it? I mean, is that right? Is that fair for our children?
Yeah, and answer it in the context of whether or not that's right and what it actually is, but also what can we do? What can churches, you're a pastor of a wonderful church, and you're not trying to be a pro-party pastor. You're trying to be pro-principle. Am I right about that?
That's right.
So what can pastors do, church members do, and what about the issues she addressed?